What does injustice look like and how does it affect our mental health? This is something that I've been wondering about for some time now. And I think that the two are so closely linked, so intertwined, that you can't actually separate the two. Injustice is our sense of fairness. Our sense of fairness, not about laws and not about political structures and all of that, or rules and things. It's about our sense of fairness that we feel about the way something plays out. And if we're not aware of how it is that that is brought to bear on our perception of whether or not we're treated fairly or we're being done right by the people who we have rights over and things like that, we'll automatically assume that our interpretation of justice is exactly the same as everyone else's. But of course, there has to be some absolute truth that we can use as a guiding principle, as a guiding compass almost, to determine at which point do we rule in favor of one or the other. And that's where social justice and legal structures and all of that comes into play. But when it comes to mental health, it doesn't matter about what the legal structures say. It's about the perception of justice that's important. Because the legal structures are usually driven by human interpretation of universal laws. And I say universal laws because there's no shortage of evidence that confirms that the prevailing kind of principles that people try to live by, it's consistent across the board. Even in those communities and societies where you find that there's a horrible distortion of that implementation, but if you look deeper than that, you'll understand why it is that they believe they are upholding the same thing. That's why there's so much problems in this world, is that there's too little effort to understand why it is that someone cannot see things our way, and too much effort in just demanding that they do. So how does this justice come about? The best description I ever came across for it is something along the lines of this. It's a prophetic narration from the Muslim traditions. And what it says is that wrongdoing is that which wavers in the soul and causes uneasiness in the breast, even though people have repeatedly given their legal opinion in its favor. Now, when you think about that, wavers in the soul and causes uneasiness in the chest, we're so detached from our sense of self that doesn't feel like injustice or wrongdoing. And when I say wrongdoing, I mean this is talking about how we feel about what we are doing, not what someone else is doing to us, right? So if you're so detached from who you are, from what makes you feel a certain way in a situation, that mindfulness, that self-awareness, if you detach, disconnected from that, you wouldn't be able to identify this as your own potential wrongdoing. You're going to look at it and think, I don't like how you're making me feel. And that's one of the biggest signs of injustice, is when you blame someone else for how it is that you feel about yourself. You don't treat me like this and you don't make me feel like that. You're responsible for how you feel. They're responsible for how they treat you. How you feel about how they treat you is up to you. What you do with that feeling is up to you. And it by no means justifies or defends or condones anyone's bad behavior or anyone's harsh treatment of others. All right? We'll come to that in a second. So when we look at this feeling of unease in the breast, this wavering in the chest that makes us feel unsettled when we're doing something, immediately we go into defense mode. Because remember, if you're not in tune with that and you don't hold yourself accountable, then automatically you're going to want to protect yourself from this feeling of dis-ease, of discomfort, right? Because it feels like a threat, it feels like a vulnerability, it feels like I'm not going to prevail in this space and I need to do something about that. And that's where the excuses start coming out. That's where we start finding reasons and finding philosophies and rulings and religious decrees and all sorts of things that says that don't care what you think. I'm right because here, look at this. It tells me that I am justified in what I'm doing, that I'm right and you're wrong, or that it's within my legal rights to be able to do this. And that's where unethical behavior comes from. So if we're going to rely on legal structures to determine what is ultimately justice, we're missing the point. Because those are man-made frameworks that eventually legislate themselves into oblivion. And this is proven by history, Go and do the research and you'll see every major empire, every major culture eventually imploded because of over-legislation being one of the major contributing factors to it. And the reason why you get to that point of over-legislation is because you try to compensate and mitigate all of these gaps, these loopholes that people find to get away with murder, so to speak. And sometimes, unfortunately, literally. That's why someone can get off from a murder charge on a technicality because of the perception of an unfair trial, even though the evidence is stacked against them to say that they're guilty. Now, the important thing about this when it comes to mental health is what is it that drives someone to want to take that gap when they get it? It's a lack of self-worth, a lack of self-respect. What you hold yourself accountable for is a reflection of who you are and what you think of yourself. It's not a reflection of your prowess and your stealth and your ability to be able to flex and play the system and all of that. That's absolute rubbish. That's how we try and compensate for our egotistical tendencies, because our ego is driven by our insecurities, and our insecurities are what it is that we try to protect ourselves from becoming visible to the world, because that's what happens when you have a low self-esteem. When you have a low self-esteem, you're more concerned about how you're going to be perceived than who you are. And the only time you will reveal who you truly are is in a safe space. And when I say a safe space, I mean a space in which you know the repercussions are going to be contained, that the impact is going to be limited, and that you have a high probability of being able to prevail over the people that you are unjust towards. That's cowardice. And a person who is cowardly knows deep down inside that they are cowardly, but they are so distracted by their rage, their belief in their warranted rage, that they don't care who they're expressing the rage against. And that's why injustice is so important, or justice is so important, because if we experience injustice at the hands of one that we cannot bring to book, that we cannot call to account, that will create a rage in us that will cause us to look for themes of that injustice everywhere else in our life. In the spaces where we are not willing to handle the consequences of us acting out and raging and claiming the justice that we believe is needed or that is deserved, in those spaces we'll become passive-aggressive, or we'll become compliant, whimsical, we'll conform, and we'll lose our backbone. And then we'll start playing the system, so to speak. But we still need to vent about that injustice. So what are we going to do? We're going to wait for an opportunity where those consequences are consequences that we either don't consider or we are willing to live with. And the moment we find a space where we are willing to live with those consequences, where we think, I don't care what happens, you're going to hear what I have to say, or you're going to feel my rage, that's where we let loose. That's where we vent and we rage and we become the aggressors that once oppressed us. Not because the people we are doing it to deserve it, but because we know that they are unlikely to be able to resist it. And that's why when injustice is carried out against us, if we have no reason to believe we are in a position to be able to push back and reclaim our justice from the source, we'll take that and project it on others, because we're defined by how someone else treated us. So a healthy self-esteem is at the core of everything that you do in life. Every single thing. And I've said this 1,000 times before. I've had 1 or 2 episodes already that have been dedicated to this topic. But it is so fundamentally critical that if you don't realize exactly where your self-esteem is at, you're going to go through life believing that everyone else is responsible for what it is that you couldn't achieve. The system is like this, and that's why you need to find a cause for justice in that. And that's why you get people who are willing to stand up and fight against things that make absolutely no sense. And that's why we then diminish human lives and we increase the value of animals over human lives. It's not that animals are not important. It's that we lose that balance. We lose sight. We lose perspective. We lose context. Why? Because we're raging against the perception of a system that is oppressing us. But we won't challenge the system itself. We'll legislate new things to plug the gaps of the system that we have. And that's where we go wrong. Because we never ever solve the problem of injustice that is inherent in the way we're doing something or in the way we experience something. We don't correct the source of that injustice. We don't break those cycles like we spoke last week about generational cycles. We don't look to break those cycles. We look to try and make them redundant in some way because we think we know better. And then we just make the same mistakes again. So we need to be careful about how it is that we want to go about claiming justice and rights and all of these things if we're not going to equally hold ourselves accountable for the justice and the rights that others have a right to from us, not only towards us. And that's the problem. When you have a low self-esteem, you only focus on what it is that you need from others. And the ones who recognize that they need to also honor what others need from them, they're the ones that become easy prey for the ones that have a low self-esteem. And for this reason, there is no shortage of relationships I come across where there's one good person and one absolutely self-loathing tyrant. And it's not gender specific. I've seen it where women are the tyrants and men are the submissive ones, and men are the tyrants and women are submissive. So this narrative about gender being the main reason for all of these things, forget it. There's truth to the fact that men have more resource and capability to be able to correct it. That I will buy 100%. Because just by virtue of their nature, their capacity, their capabilities, and apart from the historical structures that have been created that favors their participation, apart from all of that, by their very nature, they are problem solvers. They are not nurturers. So if anyone should be able to solve a problem that requires an analytical and critical mind, it is a man more than it is a woman. Not that women are incapable of it, but women are more inclined to focus on how they feel about the injustice. Men are supposed to be the ones who will correct the injustice. We've lost that balance. And that's how we end up with all the social ills that we have. And then we focus on the social ills and we demonize people who are struggling with the consequences of the social ills. And then we start attacking the minority groups and the gender politics and all of these other things. And we think that we're doing something right by protecting the sanctity and the wholesomeness of our traditions and our culture and our religions and all of these wonderful traditional beliefs that we hold on to because we believe that's the only thing that makes sense. But at no point in time do we stop to reflect on ourselves and see how it is that we've created the imbalance that has resulted in individuals needing to find peace and to find a sense of self external to all of that injustice. I've said before that when women rage, they destroy social fabric. When men rage, they destroy the spirit of individuals. Because men rage at trying to break someone down. Women rage at demanding that something be done. And that's just, it's a generalization. I get that it's a generalization. But the exceptions are not what's causing the problems. But unfortunately, because of our low self-esteem and our distraction, we're always focusing on the exceptions and feeling threatened by those exceptions. Why is it that religious zealots have so much of power and influence over the masses? It's not because religion teaches that. It's because religion becomes a suitable tool to guilt people into following you from a position of fear. And then you preach from a position of fear, and the position of fear subdues anyone's ability to think critically because of the threat of consequences if you question. That's why we associate with religion. That's why we associate with classism, with elitism, with big brands and loud lifestyles and the color of our skin. Because if who I am feels inadequate, I'm going to associate myself with something that I know you will respect. And that right there is the source of injustice. When you don't hold yourself accountable for your low self-esteem and you blame society for not giving you a chance. There's one striking image I saw once from one of the African countries, unfortunately, where it was a famine-stricken area. It could have been Sudan, could have been Ethiopia. You take your pick. Unfortunately, we got more examples than we should ever have in Africa. But there was one thing that struck me about this image. It was an elderly lady who, despite looking clearly poverty-stricken and famished, the resilience and the tenacity and just the look of dignity in her face when she went about scrounging for water and food confirmed that your dignity is yours to claim. No one can give that to you. So if you're waiting for someone to hand your dignity to you and use that as your reason for believing that you have a right to rage at the world, then that's on you. It's not on anyone else. And that's why you end up with people who feel as if they were treated badly, who then don't own what it is that they took from those experiences. The victim mindset sets in and they rage at anyone that actually challenges them. And if they have the means and the ability and the strength and the resources to be able to get away with that rage, they become tyrants. And they will frame their right to that rage and that anger and that lunacy and brutality. They will frame it in such eloquent ways about religion and about don't let the devil come between us, and don't let this happen to us, and don't let that happen to us, and understand that this is my right and you are supposed to listen to me and all. The moment you start bringing in laws and rights and responsibilities into an argument, you've lost. It means that who you are and the substance you have in the argument that you're presenting about why something is right or wrong, it means that you know that that is not enough. It's like, I think Einstein said something to the effect that if you understand something well enough, you'll be able to explain it simply enough. So if you always have to resort to elaborate legal structures and legal arguments and philosophical debates and all sorts of things to justify why it is that you are being unjust and that injustice that you're practicing is actually not injustice, it's because you're trying to protect yourself from being inadequate. Your self-worth, your self-esteem is your responsibility. It's no one else's. The fact that you feel like crap when you wake up in the morning and you need to find something to distract you or to numb it to get through the day, it's on you. It's not on anyone else. Your parents may have had an impact on you up to a point. But the moment you achieved an age where you were able to exercise your agency, your ability to choose, and you can claim your privileges as an adult, and you can claim your resources that you believe you have a right to. If you can do all of that, you also have the ability and the responsibility to stop blaming your past for how it is that you're presenting yourself and behaving in the present. The easiest thing in the world to do is to rage, to destroy, to break people down and to destroy structures and destroy institutions. This is the easiest thing in the world to do because it doesn't require any thinking. It just requires anger. And anger is a defense mechanism. It is a defense mechanism to demand significance when you feel as if you're insignificant. Again, it's because you feel insignificant. And if you are truly insignificant in a certain setting, you need to own why it is that you are insignificant and decide if you want to put in the effort to earn your significance or do you want to exit. But imposing your demand for significance on those who cannot resist you, that's not justice. That's you projecting your demons on someone else and making them responsible for something that someone else did to you. So, justice and mental health, 100% hand in hand, because our feelings of stress, anxiety, anger, all of those emotions, they're fueled by that innate sense of, this is unfair. I don't deserve this. This shouldn't happen to me. What did I do to deserve this? All of those sorts of things. After all I've done, this is what I get in return. It's always about that feeling of something being unfair. And if you use that as a reason to create oppression on someone else because you felt oppressed, you're part of the problem. You're not part of the solution. And when you're part of the problem, you don't get to complain about the problem because you are part of the problem. You're enabling the degradation of society that everyone is complaining about. Then we look at the leaders, the political leaders around the world, and we complain about them. And we say, look at this corruption here, and look at the corruption there, and look at this buffoon that took up political office and he doesn't even know how to address a crowd or string together a proper sentence, or they convicted criminals and they taking up leadership positions and all of this. So they won't be able to get it right without your participation. So the fact that we don't have critical mass towards doing what's right, that's the problem. Because it confirms that the majority of people are self-loathing. You know why self-loathing? Because you have to be self-loathing to allow yourself to be party to something that undermines your dignity and your self-respect. I'll say that again. You have to be self-loathing. You have to have a certain loathing towards yourself. You have to have a certain disdain, a certain contempt for yourself and your space and your position and what it is that you believe you are incapable of overcoming. You have to have a certain negative tendency towards that to justify why it is that you can do something that you know is not right. Why? How many times don't you hear people who do things saying, don't judge me because you don't know how bad I've got it. You don't know my struggle. You don't know what I've been through. If everyone had a right to claim their ability to rage and vent and oppress and cause harm because of what they've been through, then no one would have a right to justice. We need to stop this insanity. We need to stop the stupidity of how it is that we try to rationalize our emotional space and how it is that we try to justify why it's okay for us to be able to treat others badly. And your rights and responsibilities has got nothing to do with it. Rights and responsibilities is there so that you can have maybe some sort of meaningful discussion about, okay, well, here's a reasonable request from my side about something. But it's not there to establish healthy relationships. I always tell couples when they come to me and they're having difficulties, show me one relationship where you had a marriage that failed because people didn't know what their rights and responsibilities were in that relationship. It's always about unfairness. It's all about someone claiming more than what they're contributing, someone withholding more than what they should, someone treating someone else badly because of something that happened to them before they even met them. That's why relationships fail. And relationships fail because of, if we want to use modern mainstream terminology, poor mental health. It's not poor mental health, it's just a lack of self. A lack of honor and dignity and accountability in how it is that you hold yourself accountable for your behavior. And that's why self-esteem is such an important thing, self-worth. You won't hold yourself accountable, you won't hold yourself to a higher standard if you believe it's okay not to be that. If you believe that there's some justice that defends your position about why it is that you can slack, why it is that you can abdicate accountability. Oh, you know how bad I had it. Oh, you're lucky I left because I thought you were better off without me. That's self-serving. Don't try to frame your abdication of accountability in a way that makes it seem as if you're honorable. There's no honor in abdicating accountability. And if there's no honor in abdicating accountability, when you do it, it confirms that space in which you are, in your own mind with your sense of self, that space is contaminated. And it's contaminated by your internal conversation because of what you choose to hold on to and what you choose to rage at, not because there's something around you that is justifying your behavior. You don't fight justice with injustice or injustice with injustice. Because then, again, you're part of the problem. You just escalate the injustice. And you just lose sight even more of what it is that good, grounded fairness is supposed to look like. So maybe it's a good time to just repeat that quote I said earlier. That saying, that prophetic tradition. Wrongdoing is that which wavers in the soul and causes uneasiness in the breast. Even though people have repeatedly given their legal opinion in its favor, and that's the part. The legal opinion in its favor. That's where we go searching desperately for people who will take our part. Democracy, right there. Slap bang in your face. The failure of democracy is that you can put up the most ludicrous argument, but if you can get enough critical mass to support your ludicrous argument, you'll prevail. And then we think that, hey, that's the best we can offer. It hasn't served us, ever. But then we convince ourselves that, hey, it's a system, it works, so it's the only system we've got, we need to work with it. No, we don't. We need to start understanding how it is that this democratic approach to life, and I'm not talking about democracy just within the context of politics, This democratic approach to life, believing that everyone has equal say over everything, that everyone has an equal voice over everything, it's absolute crap. You either have credibility that you've earned or you don't. And if you haven't earned that credibility and you still demand to have a platform to voice your opinion on something, you're an oppressor. You are part of the injustice. Hold yourself to account first before you want to go and correct the world. Hold yourself to account first before you want to preach to others about how it is that they must conduct themselves. Then you'll see self-respect developing within you. Then you'll see a sense of shame develop about how it is that you have shortcomings because you're human, but you are intent on wanting to do something about the shortcomings. You're not going to try to make excuses for it and hold other people accountable for it because you don't know how bad I got it, or you don't know how bad my childhood was, or whatever it is. These days, more often than not, you'll find people who had bad childhoods, not good ones. Because unfortunately, for the last 30 years, we've been horribly distracted by the massive change that we've been experiencing as a society, as a populace. It's insane. Everyone's always looking to defend why they shouldn't be asked to do more, instead of holding themselves accountable for why it is that they're not doing as much as they can. Your self-worth is literally your salvation. And I'm not talking religiously or spiritually. Your self-worth is the difference between sanity and insanity, rage and peace. But if you don't claim your self-worth, and you keep going through life blaming everyone and every system and everything else for how you feel about yourself, you'll never ever rise above it. You'll always be fighting to be relevant within it. So at which point are you going to claim your self-worth? At which point are you going to hold yourself accountable for your opinion of yourself and realize that justifying your escapism, your coping mechanisms and everything else, at which point are you going to realize that that's just excuses you're making for yourself so that you don't have to own how it is that you feel about who you are? Life is tough. No one's suggesting it's not. But just because life is tough, it doesn't give you the right or the reason to go about perpetuating the very things that make it tough for you. Injustice is at the core of everything that is wrong in this world. And it starts in your personal life. It doesn't start in the social domains, in the political domains. Injustice is not about what happens in the court or in criminal matters. Injustice is about how it is that you take for granted the people around you because you feel more entitled to what you need from them than what it is that you believe they're entitled to what they need from you. If you're always going to make excuses for why it is that you can cut corners but no one else is allowed to, you're an oppressor. You're a victim, you're a self-loathing tyrant. Just because you don't look like one according to the mainstream definitions doesn't mean you're not one. There's no shortage of people who grew up feeling completely neglected and invisible by their parents, even though their parents weren't bad people. They were just absent. They were present, but they were emotionally unavailable. They were emotionally inaccessible. They were more interested in doing everything that would earn them credits in social standing rather than actually participating actively in the lives of their families. And that goes for both men and women. I'm not for 1 second suggesting that one is more guilty than the other. But I'm not going to speak on behalf of women because I'm not a woman. So I will speak on behalf of men because I know exactly what it is firsthand, through engagement, through experience, through understanding. I know firsthand what it is that men are capable of doing, but many choose not to. They choose not to because they are too busy blaming women for not treating them right. We need to change the narrative. We need a real man renaissance. And when men claim their space correctly, not as brutes, not with threats, not with anger and with power and with the manipulation and control of resources, but because of the merit and the credibility of who they are as humans, when men claim that space, we stand a bigger chance of establishing balance in society than what we do right now. Don't get distracted by all of the politics that's playing out. Don't get distracted by the transgender politics or the identity politics or any of these things. Those are all symptoms of the imbalance of society, and men, I will always hold men primarily responsible for that imbalance. Because we can't on the one hand want to claim strength and power and dominance, and on the other hand claim to be weak and ineffective because women are not cooperating. Self-respect, self-worth, dignity, accountability, integrity, authenticity. It's wonderful to talk about it, and it's wonderful to post about it online. How many of us are holding ourselves accountable for actually living that in our life? The world is in a really sad state, and there are some days when it just appears sadder than other days. This week was one of those weeks, because the volume of men who are not doing right by women, and the volume of men who are blatant tyrants and abusers and oppressors that are getting social kudos and spreading misogynistic bull, the volume of that this week was just unreal. Men are failing society long before women failed society. But women have a part to play. And maybe on another day, if I can get a woman that will be willing to engage, someone knowledgeable and someone who has insight, to have a meaningful discussion about that, we can have that conversation. But I have to restrain myself from speaking on behalf of women, because I cannot, with credibility, claim to understand the woman's experience. Remember, if you're doing something, even if you are justified in doing it, and feels within you that this is not right, that is not fair, call yourself to account and stop doing it. Take care.